I used to work as a civilian bush pilot back in the 1980s, all the way through to the 1990s. If you don't know what that is, basically, I would fly small aircraft over terrain that was rugged and hard to access by any other means, usually to deliver supplies or people, depending on what the assignment was. Because of my role, I ended up doing a lot of work in coordination with the government. I'm talking like relief schemes and things like that. Let me be clear, I was never a government worker officially, but I would be hired by them, sort of like a contractor, working on different projects or operations. Most of the shit I would do would just be to deliver supply drops in the middle of zones not easy to access, or ferry people across the country and drop them at a need-to-know location. Not in the USA, mind you, I'm talking about in foreign countries. I know that what I am going to say is going to sound incredibly hard to believe, but I am going to do my best anyway. I am going to tell you about a time when I was hired by the government, but more specifically, as I later guessed, when I was hired by the CIA. It wasn't even supposed to be some top secret thing. This was in South America, in Colombia. Now, it was a pretty turbulent time for the country. You had the cartels causing trouble, not to mention the FARC, the revolutionaries, who were fighting against the Colombian government itself. I'm talking random acts of terrorism, planned kidnappings, sometimes of notable figures, not to mention the heavy drug trafficking that had a vice grip on the country. Then you had the National Liberation Army, who did most of the same shit, just on a smaller scale, mixed in with things like illegal mining and other forms of extortion. And since they were all in the drug trade, there ended up being a lot of clashing with the drug cartels, the big major ones. It was a hotbed of chaos, and the CIA was involved in the country during this time, mainly to crack down on the drug trafficking, since it was affecting portions of America, and they did not want these major cartels having so much power. They even later got involved in the fight against the FARC, but that was not until the 2000s. Anyway, enough rambling and backstory. I'm sure you don't all need a history lesson. I'm not trying to make up some bullshit about how I was approached on the street and yada yada. I was a pilot for many, many years. I even served in Nam for a good few years before I got wounded and had to go home. I had done countless operations and worked in tandem with the government, transporting aid workers and supplies. And whatever you can name, I did it. A lot of the times you knew the story. Sometimes you didn't ask questions and took the money anyway. This was one of the latter cases. I was asked to transport 2 American government contractors, is how they describe themselves, although I later learned that they were CIA. I only learned on the flight over there that they were extracting an informant who was waiting around the area. I think he was being hunted by either the cartel or someone else for being a rat and had to lay low for a few weeks just to get out of the city alive. They offered me a lot of damn money to do this, and so I shut up and I got on with it. The 2 men were pretty elusive. Nothing they wore struck me as odd, and they, of course, both had firearms on their person. If I tried to make small talk, I would be told to shut the hell up. They seemed really, really jumpy. Any turbulence, and boy was there a lot of it, and they were immediately on edge, looking out the windows like it would do them any good, making sure to keep their hands close by to their weapons. I figured whoever this guy was, he must have known something or was important. The landing was not smooth. I was not really given the whole picture or the exact coordinates until we were pretty far out on the flight. I think it was to do with secrecy. They wanted me to fucking eyeball a landing zone on the fly. They were absolutely insane. If I knew any of this beforehand, I would have said no, but once we were up there, that was pretty much it. We had some problems with the landing. One of the wheels on the landing gear was loose, and so when we hit the short patch of dirt that I managed to pick out, we wobbled and dipped a little bit low, and the body of the craft took a few dings. Nothing unrecoverable, but uncomfortable to say the least. It made me really anxious. We were pretty much on the mark. I thought they'd tell me to shut up and stay in the craft, but they told me that I had to come with, and to walk in front of them at all times. This did not seem like protocol, and it made me insanely nervous. What would they need me for? It did not take long of walking before we found the guy, but that is not all that we found either. It looked like what I can only describe as some kind of archaeological dig. There was equipment scattered everywhere, tossed around, some of it not well maintained at all, just left there. There were random holes in the ground, and it just did not make a lot of sense or mean anything to me at all. But there were bodies around this place, human bodies. It smelled horrible. It smelled like old dirt left untouched and buried somewhere for centuries. That really earthy smell of rot and decay, and it was just so foul. There were probably 3 bodies scattered around the place. One was leaning over a piece of equipment, which I had no idea what it was. He was facing away, his body hanging over it, and his feet lifted up off of the ground. He had no sign of any wounds or anything that would suggest he ended up dead due to the cartel or the FARC killing him. Another was laying on his back, clutching a shovel that was still gripped tight in both of his hands. He looked stiff, like he was frozen solid into place when he died. His eyes were wide open, and he was staring up into the air, but had this horrible look of shock on his face, like he died of fright, and his face just froze like that. The last man, his shirt and his clothes were in tatters, and he had scars that looked like they came from something sharp. I could not see any bloodstains or anything though, and the man they were sent to grab, he was just standing there, frozen to the spot, staring at all of this. He looked catatonic. I don't know how long he had been fixed to the spot, but his clothes were a mess and had loads of dirt and grime on them, and it looked like he had a bullet wound somewhere in his abdomen that had been fixed up just enough to stop the bleeding and keep him alive. Like I said, there was no evidence of a firefight or a dispute, aside from the slash marks on one body and that one bullet wound. There were not any frantic footsteps in the ground or the mud. There were not any tracks to suggest that any vehicles had rolled in through here. I have no idea why these 2 guys made me walk in front of them instead of leaving me safe at the plane. But they walked in front of me now, towards the man. He would not respond to their words or anything. It took one of the contractors slapping him across the face for him to become responsive, but it did not stop him being weird. It was like after that slap, he just snapped back into reality. He suddenly became frightened. He screamed, and they had to grab him and tell him to shut up so that he would not shout and run away. He had this terrified look on his face, and he immediately started stuttering and trying to explain what happened. He could not get through a single sentence though. He kept tripping over his words, and halfway through a sentence, his face would just go blank and his mouth would be hanging wide open. He would stop talking and just start drooling, pause for a few seconds with this blank face, and then start the cycle back up again. These government contractors spoke to him at length, but I could not really hear from the distance that I was at, so I don't know what they were saying exactly. I know that they had to keep slapping him and grabbing him for him to focus on what they were saying, because his eyes kept drifting and he stopped paying attention. But I kept seeing him itching at his skin, pretty aggressively too. It looked like it was flaking in places, and like he had some kind of severe eczema. Once the men walked away and went off to talk to themselves, he went back to staring off into space and making no noise whatsoever. He was not blinking, and I could not even see or hear him breathing. I didn't see his chest move at all. He was just staring at the bodies and the sight. I saw him itching his skin again, but he almost started digging his nails in really deeply. There was a red patch on his arm that was clearly very irritated, and he dug his nails right under, until the skin was bleeding, and I saw him actually pull something out from underneath his skin. It was small, incredibly small, probably about as small as a fly would be, smaller even. All I could make out was that it looked black, and he ate the thing. He put it in his mouth, and then started chewing, and then made a swallowing motion, and then tried to do the same thing again. The contractors were obviously paying attention, because one of them seems to be in the middle of retching while speaking, and asked what the hell is wrong with him. The man, the informant, I guess I will call him, suddenly just snaps out of it again, and asks the guy, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" He was still chewing, and is just standing there clueless. The contractor tells him what he just did, and the informant puts his fingers inside his mouth, realizes what he was doing, and then he just started vomiting on the ground. There was nothing in his vomit either. It looked as if he was starved of food. The CIA guys were really nervous and twitchy at this point, like they were on the plane. The guy is trying to move closer to talk to them, and they keep backing away and telling him to just stay where he is. At one point, they order the guy to lay down on his stomach, but he is just still picking at his skin and itching and inching closer and asking them why and things like that. He didn't realize what the situation was. They ordered me to force him onto the floor. They started pulling their guns out when this guy kept inching forward, and this made me really worried. I was not going to say no when they had all of the power, even if they didn't point them at me specifically. When I got close to the guy and I felt him, he felt unnaturally cold to the touch. It was pretty hot outside, especially in the dense jungle like that, but he was freezing. I forced him to the floor onto his stomach, and he really did not put up much of a fight. He did not get back up once he was down. He just stayed there. Now here is the really strange part. The CIA guys, they had their guns pointed in my direction. They told me to put my hands into his pocket to see if I could find anything. So naturally, I looked down to try and reach into his pocket to see if I could find anything, and they just started screaming at me. They scream at me to lift up my head and only look forward, to not look down no matter what I do. I was sweating by this point, and I just followed their orders. I yelled that I found something, and they told me to remove it without looking and to just place it behind me. I did. I tried to look out of my peripherals. I was too scared to chance anything else. I really could not make out much. Whatever the thing was not incredibly big. It had these really sharp edges and was hot to the touch. It was definitely made out of some kind of metal. That is all I can tell you about the thing. After this, I was told to stand up, put my hands above my head, and then walk backwards. I asked them why. I asked them what I did wrong. They told me to just shut up and listen to them. They told me that if I did, everything would be fine. After a while of walking backwards slowly, one of them grabbed me by the head, covering my eyes with their hands, and he shoved me into the ground too, facing the opposite way from the archaeological dig. He gave me a pat down and pulled up my shirt and stuff. While this was happening, I heard a gunshot, which made me flinch really hard, and I almost shit my pants. I was told to relax and not to worry. I was told not to look behind me, no matter what. And then they stood me up and made me walk in front of them back to the aircraft. The flight back to our destination was not my proudest moment. I spent most of the time sobbing, begging them to tell me what was going on, telling them that I would not say a word, etc., that I would do anything if they just left me unharmed, that I would promise anything. If I was not flying a plane, I reckon they would have smacked me upside the head. Instead, I was told to be quiet, and I had to be a sniveling mess in silence. One last thing. Before I was walked away to the plane, I was told to wait for a second. When we were walking back to the plane, I could smell the smoke. When we got on the aircraft, I could see some flames starting to rise and spread. It was the damn jungle. Surely that would have spread and burned down the entire area, but they just did not seem to care. I don't know the reason why at all. Once we touched down, that was an entire different story, and I do not want to relive the horrible process. I was not allowed to just go home, and that is all I will say about that. Let's just say that I did not get off lightly, and I was lucky to be alive. I was paid, which is something, but it came with a price. I kept quiet about this all these years in fear that they would get me somehow, but I have decided to stop being scared. I figured that even if no one believes the story, people deserve to know. There needs to be a record kept somewhere that they can't just scrub away. I wish I had more answers. I'm sorry that I don't. I still stay awake each and every single night, wondering why they didn't just kill me. I don't normally share my stories. I think I shared this once, but I think it was just with family and friends, and that was a few years ago now. I'm just going to type my experience straight. When I was young, I used to stay pretty often at my grandparents' house. Most of my family has lived close by to one another, on a couple of 100 acres of land in South Carolina. That is to say, I could stay at my grandparents' house pretty often, because they live well within walking distance away. There had always been talk of the house being haunted, anecdotes mostly. Great-grandpappy tucking my mother in when she was a child, after he had passed, that sort of thing. Regular stories you would expect to hear from your grandparents. I never put much faith into them, and really, I still consider myself a skeptic. Granted, this incident ignited an interest in the paranormal that I am aware is at odds with my general disposition. So, when I was 10 or 11 years old, or maybe even a little bit older, I remember sleeping on my grandparents' couch. My grandfather turned in late. I'm talking 1 a.m. I normally went to sleep not long after him, because I slept in the living room, and that was where he watched his old movies and the late night show. This particular night though, something definitely felt off in the hours before I went to bed. Like the dogs, who were normally too energetic for their own good, were really aloof. I remember that specifically because Marky did not even bark and growl at me when I came over. That dog was one of the most annoying yappity poodles that would just not ever shut up. Anyway, I woke up that night with what felt like a hand pressing down on me. Back then, I did not know what sleep paralysis was, but today I do, which helps with the skepticism. Like I said though, that night I woke up to some horrendous pressure on my chest, and with my entire body being unresponsive. It wasn't pins and needles though, more like things had just stopped cooperating. The couch that I was sleeping on was just beside the door, between the front-facing window and the front door specifically. The latter was open, the screen door and storm door both, with the outside light still on and shining into the house. I remember a distinct lack of insect chirping. In South Carolina, late at night, the crickets are always chirping. Standing in the threshold of the door was a figure. I can't recall much of its body, except that the figure was absolutely masculine, because then, and in the intervening years and now, I always think of the thing as a he. I want to say that the man's body was shadowed, maybe because of the light, maybe because that's just how it was. Again, I can't really recall much on that front. I don't remember it looming exactly, or staring at me in any threatening way. Actually, what I can remember is being really confused, then, as well as after I stopped being in that state, as in, regain control of myself. The confusion was and still is odd to me. I'm not even sure the right way to phrase it. For a couple of years, I thought I was a deer dreaming of being a human. I know exactly how weird that sounds, and no, I'm not, nor have I ever been a furry. There was just this lingering doubt back then. I still don't think the explanation just then does the confusion justice either. I don't really possess the words to describe it, just the strongest disconnection with who I was. Like, I almost didn't feel human in that moment. I thought maybe I was just someone pretending to be human, that my brain was tricking me, that I was a human, and that really, I was something else. I didn't feel any shame or wrongness. I just felt confusion. I never did stay at my grandparents' house again, at least, not until recently, when Hurricane Irma was supposed to hit. My grandparents' home is the best suited to weather a storm, so most of my family went there, and no, I did not have another experience. What happened instead was that my youngest cousin went through a night terror, not just once, but an episode every single night while staying. Her mother told me earlier this morning that there was none last night after they went to him. I have not spoken to anyone else about my experience, and I am almost afraid to ask her what it is that she had seen. Anyways, I mostly just wanted to get this off of my chest. I want to share a story that happened to me 2 nights ago. I was encouraged by my friends who tell me people need to know what I have experienced. I recently moved into a condo in southeast Portland, Oregon. I was out on my balcony smoking a cigarette when I noticed something strange. Across the condo complex on a neighbor's balcony, I see 2 silhouettes. It's late, mind you, probably around 2 a.m., and it's a weeknight. One silhouette was slightly taller than the other, but they both looked to be girls between the ages of 8 and 12 years old. The 2 stood close to one another. I could hear them knocking on the 2nd-story balcony door. My light was off, so aside from my cigarette burning, I don't think anyone could see me well enough to know that I was there. And once I saw them, I was frozen still. I don't know why, but as soon as I could make out their shapes, I felt an overwhelming sense of terror. Like something imminent and dangerous was preying on me, and I could not move. I went into freeze response. After a few minutes, my neighbor opened up their blinds and looked outside. I was afraid for them. I wanted to yell for them to stop, but I was more afraid of being seen. I can't explain it, but I knew I did not want them to know that I was watching. The neighbor stepped back, I think, confused. I heard the voice of the older, taller girl on the balcony. It was completely monotone, not really the voice of a child. Something about it sounded really wrong to me. I could not hear exactly what she was saying, but at one point, the smaller one turned around and stared straight at me, like she knew I was there the whole entire time. I almost pissed my pants. I could not move. It was dark. It was far. But when she turned, the light from inside the neighbor's balcony shed light on her face. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were pitch black. Her clothes were strange and old, really outdated, and she was expressionless. The neighbor had the door open only an inch or 2, and her hand looked ready to slam it shut. The taller girl became angry, and she seemed as though she was going to make her way in through the den door. The neighbor slammed it and locked it hard. She stepped back away from the door, leaving the blinds drawn, and I lost sight of her. The 2 girls stood there for a second before the smaller one looked up at the taller one. The 2 of them both looked at each other. They both said nothing. There was no communication between them at all, and in unison, they both turned around and both looked toward me. I immediately bolted inside and locked the door. I left the lights off and looked through my blinds over at the neighbor's balcony. This is where it gets really crazy sounding, but I witnessed this with my own 2 eyes. The 2 girls, they dematerialized. I mean, they just turned into a cloud, like a swarm of gnats, and then they were gone. I watched the spot where they had been standing for maybe a minute. It was the longest minute of my life. Then I stepped back, away from the window. I was shaking violently, and my cat began to rub against my leg. The cigarette filter, still in my hand, was flattened from me pinching it so hard. I looked back outside because I wanted to try and find them. I looked where they were on the porch to see if I had gone insane temporarily and that they were just hiding there or something. But they were gone. My neighbor returned to where I could see her in the window. She was on the phone, probably with the police, and that is when I noticed them again, directly above her, on the damn roof, just standing above her, holding hands. Then they got on their hands and knees. I was still completely gripped by fear and horrified by what I was seeing. So these kids are on the roof somehow. I don't know how they could have even gotten up there. They get on their hands and knees and are moving on top of this lady's roof. Their skin was so pale that I could tell that they were facing me. They were both looking right at me. I didn't even know what the hell was happening or why. I knew I had to get some kind of proof of what was happening, but I was terrified to take my eyes off of them and lose them from my view. I knew that my phone was plugged into the charger in the kitchen, and something in my head said to me, not in my own voice, "Do not move. You may not like where you see me next." Like someone was talking to me inside my mind, a different voice. It scared me so much, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I wished that someone other than my cat was there so I could validate what I saw. I broke her staring match and ran to the kitchen to get my phone. Just breaking the gaze eased a little bit of the terror, but I was still shaking. I grabbed my phone and went back to the window. The two girls stood up in unison. I pulled up my camera and snapped, but the flash reflected on my window, and it was a shitty, nothing picture. Then they just started disappearing again. Like I said earlier, dematerializing or something, because you could see like pieces of them all fading sporadically, lessening into them not being there at all at the end. I kept looking at the roof, the balconies, even down below, and I could not see anything or anyone. My neighbor was still on the phone at the door with some guy that I figured was her boyfriend. She kept talking, pointing outside, stomping her foot. He was shaking his head in what seemed like disbelief, and she passed him the phone and left my line of sight in her condo. I wanted to go out onto my balcony, but I was still very afraid. I felt sick to my stomach from the intensity of the experience. I told my boyfriend about this when he came home, and he was very, very freaked out. I have a bit of an unsettling story. A few years ago, I had to visit an open ward of the asylum for therapy. This particular ward was placed a bit outside of the hospital area and actually was in the children's asylum building. Normally, I had to go to the second floor and just wait there. Occasionally, I saw some kind of angry and kind of drugged up kids, but most of the time I spent alone in a waiting room without windows before my doctors came for me. The building always had the sinister atmosphere surrounding it, and the fact that it was 300 plus years old as well as dark did not help much. You would always hear strange creaks and whispers, but that was mostly coming from other rooms. One day, however, the doctor who was in charge of me changed her office, and so I had to go a few floors up. Though it was lighter up there because there were windows, it was still creepy. You could not open up the windows, and there were barriers around them so that you could not possibly jump out of the windows. Everything was secured or attached to something so that you could not hurt yourself or others. Since my doctor was late as always, I had the pleasure to stay in this room for quite a long time. Frankly, no one else but me and some kind of a nurse in another room seemed to be on that floor. At least, this was what I thought, until I saw a little kid standing opposite to me on the other hallway. I was a little bit surprised, but I just continued on texting. It kind of unnerved me though, and so I looked up again, just to see that he was still there. This went on for a little while. When the nurse came in, I looked away for a second, and as I turned back, he was not there anymore. There is this goth girl who frequents the cafe that I work at. Not the edgy teenage mall goth type shit, but like hippie Victorian goth. She could not be more than like 22 years old, but she is weird, unsettling. Not really creepy, just has this vibe about her that you feel sort of on edge around her. She comes in 3 times a week and gets coffee or tea and spends a couple of hours doing classwork or writing down weird symbols and shit from old books. Now, there was this pop collar dude bro type who used to come in a lot to hit on the girls studying there, or complain that her drinks were bad or overpriced, and he one day made the mistake of trying to flirt with her. She did not even acknowledge him, so he just kept getting more and more in her face and really, really obnoxious. Finally, the shitty, scaredy cat manager finally threw him out. I heard from a classmate that a couple of days later, that dude got brought to the hospital and spent a couple of weeks there with some horrible illness that nobody could really figure out what the hell it was. All the tests for every kind of illness that they could test for just kept on coming back negative, and he was in a lot of pain, kept coughing and vomiting and everything. Like I said, he was in there for a while, and I would not be surprised if it was her doing. It just seemed to line up and make sense somehow.